This episode of the Creep Street Podcast is brought to you by Martini Coffee Roasters. You know, people always look at me weird when I say I start off every morning with a big old martini. But then I set them straight, and I tell them I'm talking about Martini Coffee Roasters coffee. A delicious coffee made by the Martini family. They roast their coffee using a traditional method of sight and sound to roast those little babies to perfection. And they also sell green coffee beans for those home roasters out there. And right now, fans of the Creep Street Podcast can get 20% off their entire order by using the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Once again, for 20% off your order, use the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Martini Coffee Roasters, the perfect coffee to keep you creeps caffeinated.
You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, this is Maureen Bogey.
And this is Dylan Hackworth.
And you are listening to the Creep Street Podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. I mean, thank you all for joining us here today on this righteous journey.
Yes, the hero's journey.
Exactly. We're all on one. Now, if you are a fan of the program, please like, rate, subscribe, leave a review, post us on social media, tell a friend about us, anything like that. It really does help to spread the good word of Creep Street, and we thank you for it.
Amen, it does.
If you want to be kept up on what we're doing, you can check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Creep Street Podcast. Twitter, we're at Creep Street Pod. On our Facebook, we have a subgroup called Citizens of the Milky Way. This is just a forum where anyone can post memes, articles, funny stories, scary stories, questions, anything like that, and anyone can respond to these things. I mean, it's just a blast.
It sure is, Maureen.
And once again, you can check that out at Citizens of the Milky Way. And we know deep in our bones that one episode a week is just not cutting it.
Quit lying to yourself, folks.
Yeah. But we're blessed to know.
Yes.
That we have a solution to these woes. And it is over at patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast.
Yes, it is.
And there we have all sorts of bonus content. You're not even going to believe it. All freaking sorts of it.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. We've got full bonus episodes, movie reviews, movie rankings, short stories, interviews, and anything and everything in between. Okay. Once again, you can check that out at patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast.
Oh, ooh, yeah.
Last week, we served you up some killer plants.
Oh my gosh, and yes, we did, and people enjoyed it, though. What a sinister salad.
Oh, I like that. And, thank you for listening. If you haven't listened yet, maybe go back, take a listen, get weird with it. But today we have something a little different.
Ooh, yeah, we do.
Okay, Dylan, would you mind letting us in on it? What are we talking about today?
Citizens of the Milky Way, buckle up for this one because this episode is Night of the Black Flash.
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
There we go.
Ooh, gosh. Real quick, let me hit you with my sources.
All right, let's do it.
This is a weird one, folks.
Okay.
First was a book called Passing Strange, True Tales of New England Hauntings and Horrors by Joseph Citro. Then The Mystery of the Phantom Black Flash by Brent Swanser at Mysterious Universe. And then an article called The Spectre Leaguers, July 1692 at Historic Ipswich. Yes, folks. We're getting ready for a night of New England terrors. Now, this is one of those. This is my favorite kind of topic.
Okay.
I would put this in the realm of Hatman.
Okay.
Of Grinning Man.
Yeah.
Of Indrid Cold.
of Mothman, where these beings are not supernatural in the traditional sense. They are paranormal, but they don't seem to fit in the mold of any specific thing.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
boy, oh boy, am I excited to talk about this one.
Oh, for sure.
Like I said, these things are definitely paranormal, but not supernatural in the sense we traditionally think of ghosts. And they seem to be visitors, but not in the way we think of like extraterrestrials who come from another planet.
Okay.
This is the category of phantom beings. Shadow people and the Hat Man, they fall into this category of phantom clowns.
Oh, yeah, of course.
That's one we're going to talk about later.
Shout out to our Phantom Clowns episode.
We're going to talk about that a little bit because I think it ties into all this madness.
Oh, no.
Whatever these beings are, they seem to operate by their own rules, almost as if they are able to slip in and out of reality at will.
Wow.
Well, one such entity caused a stir many decades ago in the town of Provincetown, Massachusetts. This is the story of the Black Flash. And just a heads up, I do not mean the Black Flash from the DC comic book universe. No,
Yes.
no. We are talking about something else entirely. Now, the first journalistic mention of the Black Flash was published on October 26th, 1939, in the Provincetown Advocate. The article was titled, "Fall Brings Out the Black Flash, Hard Winter Certain as Cabin Fever Stories Start." Here's an excerpt. It ain't usual until cabin fever time that the balmy stories start, after folks have been pinned up here for too long a time in too little space with just the same faces to look at every morning, afternoon, and evening. Then the crazy yarns begin circulating. But winter seems to be shutting in early this year. Here it is only October, and the Black Flash has been prowling, scaring kids so that they won't go out nights and won't go to bed, grabbing women, jumping over 10-foot hedges with no trouble at all. Chair springs on his feet is the explanation. Side note, before we get into this is very reminiscent of a very famous phantom who terrorized London, the Spring-Heeled Jack.
Of course.
The Black Flash is very much in that vein. That is one we will be doing very soon.
Yes.
Well, in October of 1939, the children of Provincetown began to come home at night, terrified, telling their families of a strange figure that was stalking them. They claimed the figure was very tall, dressed all in black, and it would suddenly appear from out of nowhere, where it would growl at them fiercely and then disappear in the blink of an eye. Those who were able to get a better look at this mysterious figure claimed that it had a hideous, deformed face with glowing eyes. Whatever it was they were seeing, the children of Provincetown were regularly running home, screaming, crying, shaking uncontrollably. But of course, despite their children being terrified, the parents didn't take these claims all that seriously. They figured it was, the Halloween season, and there was probably just some dickhead in a costume running around town scaring the kids.
Oh, yeah.
But the parents themselves would soon believe. Well, one night, a woman named Mary Costa, some of my sources, by the way, say Marie Costa, but I'll just go with Mary Costa, was walking home alone along the shadowy streets of Provincetown. She was just passing City Hall when she encountered something unlike she had ever seen. A shadowy figure stood before her about 8 feet tall. It had just leapt out from some bushes right in front of Mary. She claimed the creature had long pointed ears and eyes that glowed. It stared at her with a menacing look that rendered Mary so terrified she couldn't even move. Then, in a flash, the entity turned and fled. Mary claimed that as the creature left the scene, it moved at a pace that no human was capable of. She said she watched as it bounded over entire fence rows with ease, able to jump to unnatural heights. Mary ran screaming to the nearest place that was open. She was actually walking that evening to the local coffee shop, and she had almost gotten there when she had her encounter. So she runs screaming to the coffee shop. Short of breath, she does her best to explain what she had just encountered. Well, a group of men rushed out to the spot of the encounter, but of course found no trace of the entity. This was the first adult attack.
Okay.
Of course, wouldn't you know it, the police didn't take the report seriously at first.
Oh, God.
But in the days to come, more and more reports came flooding in that were very similar to what Mary had seen. All of them were from grounded, sober adults who were known and liked about the community. It was no longer just children reporting these things. All the descriptions of the mysterious figure all contained the following. The figure was unnaturally tall, unnaturally fast, and able to leap to incredible heights. It was dressed all in black and wore a black cape that flapped in the nighttime breeze. Its ears were strangely pointed and its eyes glowed with either a red or silver color. But if you thought it couldn't get any weirder, buckle up. Witnesses also reported that when in the presence of the entity, there was a strange buzzing noise, almost like what a giant insect would make. Some said that it would even let out a terrible laugh that they described as having an unearthly timbre and tone. And of course, the thing displayed superhuman speed and agility. Many claimed it was able to jump 10-foot fences with no problem. And here's what is weird. Police would often get reports of sightings of this thing from entirely different parts of town at almost the exact same time, which would seem to suggest one of three things.
Okay, pop off.
One, that this thing is either very fast. Two, that the thing somehow has the ability to teleport. Or three, that there was more than one of them.
Fuck.
Some would even say that this thing had insect-like wings.
I mean, yeah, I can see it. I can see it.
Creepy.
Yeah, very scary.
But, side note, this makes me think of the Phantom Clowns episode. Remember that clown in the yellow van who would appear at like schools?
Oh, yes.
And would terrify the kids and then take off. But the police were getting reports from almost the exact same time at different points of the city.
I forgot about that one. That one was very weird.
And it was like this person was able to move at insanely quick rates around the city to scare children at these schoolyards.
And that one was like there was no reports of kids getting abducted, right?
Yes, and that's very similar to what we're going to talk about today.
So that's kind of interesting, maybe here and with the Phantom Clowns episode, and I'm sure we talked about this a little bit with the Phantom Clowns, but like maybe it's something having to do kind of where it like what we've talked about many times about like the feeding off of fear.
Yes.
Where it's just trying to scare you. It's not trying to, actually abduct you or actually kill you or whatever like that. It just needs you to get freaking scared as fuck.
Absolutely. Now, in the vast majority of these sightings that happen in Provincetown, it seems like the creature would appear, frighten the witness, and then flee. Almost like the Hat Man. It seems that it was just getting a little hit of that fear bone.
There we go.
However, there were some who did have encounters that were a bit more violent. One such encounter happened to a man named Charles Farley. Charles happened to be armed when he encountered the creature. He drew his gun and shot the thing from a short distance away. But to his horror, the entity barely seemed to react to it. It merely laughed menacingly before jumping over a fence with a single hop, vanishing into the night. Another man was out one night when he encountered the creature, while fight or flight kicked in.
Oh, gosh.
And the man threw a punch at the entity. But here's the thing. This entity caught his fist with its own.
No.
And crushed his hand with a simple squeeze.
Oh.
Throwing him to the ground.
That sucks.
One child said the creature struck him with such a power that it sent him flying backwards through the air.
So this motherfucker hit a kid?
That's what one child says.
Come on. Okay, so this guy's getting a little bit more into actual violence, clearly, than we see in many other cases. Okay, kind of a bastard.
One person even claimed that the entity shot blue fire out of its mouth.
Oh, God.
So we're getting a little weirder here. Well, it wasn't long until all of Provincetown and the surrounding areas were buzzing about this mysterious person scaring the townsfolk.
I mean, can you blame him? God.
Many nicknames were given to the Phantom, such as the Provincetown Phantom, the Black Phantom, the Phantom Fiend, the Devil of the Dune, and of course, the Black Flash, which is what the press ran with and what it is most known as today. By the way, you'll notice one of the nicknames was Devil of the Dune. Provincetown is a small town on Cape Cod.
Oh,
and so
amazing.
It's right on the shoreline, and there's dunes everywhere. So every now and then you'll hear mention of like sandy hills or dunes. They're talking about dunes because they're on the ocean. Just so that's clarified.
Oh, yeah. We love that. But we got to give a special shout out to New England.
Oh, yeah.
A special shout out in Massachusetts. That is prime New England territory, baby.
And we got a little Easter egg coming up later.
Oh,
that
by
I'm
the way,
save.
Happy Easter. We hope you enjoyed it. Just, if we're talking about it. I mean, gosh darn it, it's not even a week since Easter, for Christ's sakes.
Well, Maureen, more and more reports were coming out in the papers and in radio broadcasts, and the locals were all on edge. Speculation about what or whom the mystery phantom could be were rampant. Some thought it was pranksters or even peeping Toms. Others thought it was supernatural, a ghost or a demon with some sort of a grudge. And of course, the more religious folks in town came to think that it was the devil himself.
I mean, can you blame him?
But there were other things going on in the world that kind of helped foster this atmosphere of fear and panic. Just a year earlier, on October 30th of 1938, was the famous broadcast of Orson Welles' production of War of the Worlds.
Oh, of course, yes.
This is a very famous moment, and for those who are unaware, I'll just give you a brief explanation. We all know War of the Worlds is the famous sci-fi novel about Martians coming to Earth to overtake it.
And of course, there was the, Tom Cruise movie.
Yeah.
That came out in, I don't even know when that was, like 2000s or something like that?
Yes. And then the book was originally written by H.G. Wells, same guy who wrote The Invisible Man and stuff. He's written, classic sci-fi books. Well, Orson and his folks adapted it for the radio, but they did it in the style of a real broadcast, almost like found footage in a way.
Yeah, it was a very innovative and cool thing to do.
Yeah. Like the show opens with a live orchestra playing in New York, and then it gets interrupted by a broadcaster as if it was a real, news report. Mm-hmm. So if you hadn't been listening from the very top of the broadcast and tuned in the middle, you may have thought that you were listening to a real broadcast and that Earth was truly under attack by Martians. So there was that.
Then that happened, yeah.
Yes. On top of that, of course, there were the effects of the Great Depression and the looming threat of World War II. Mm-hmm. There were also other weird things going on in nearby areas. News made mention of a sea monster that had washed up on the shore of the nearby town of Wood End. It actually turned out to be the rotting body of a basket shark.
Ew.
Also, just a month before the Black Flash appeared, the town had been dealing with a serial arsonist who had been terrorizing the town.
Ooh.
Needless to say, folks were already on edge, which kind of made it the perfect environment for a creature like the Black Flash to appear, especially if we go by the theory that it fed off negative energy.
Mm-hmm. Off of the chaos.
Off of the kill. The Black Flash would go on to terrorize Provincetown for another 7 years, up until 1945. In November of 1945, a group of police officers reported to a local school where there had been many Black Flash sightings. Sergeant Francis Marshall was among the officers who answered the call, and he had high hopes. The schoolyard in question had a 10-foot fence all around it, and there was only one way in or out. If they could get there in time, they could finally trap this wacko who had been terrorizing the town. They kept their headlights off as well as their sirens off as they got there. Pulling up to the school quietly, one officer stayed outside the fence while 3 entered the schoolyard. They had the creature cornered in one corner of the schoolyard up against the fence. This was the one time Sergeant Francis Marshall would actually get a good look at the creature. The face of it was terrifying, but Sergeant Marshall could have sworn that it was wearing some sort of a silver-painted mask. The police began to slowly approach the figure with their guns drawn. The creature acted as if this was just another day at the office.
Oh, yeah.
They claim it stood there with its hands at its hips, almost defiant in nature. When Sergeant Marshall warned the entity not to move, it simply laughed. Then, in a flash, the creature leapt up and over the 10-foot fence and vanished. But even after it was gone, they could hear its menacing laugh echoing in the night. The The very next month, it was a foggy afternoon in December. The 4 Kennard children, Al, Joey, Eleanor, and Louie, were out in the yard of their home located on Standish Street. The kids were playing when all of a sudden Eleanor stopped and looked at something. The other kids asked what she was looking at. She pointed at a nearby sand dune, saying that there was a bear crouched at the top of the hill. Well, Provincetown, like I said, is located on Cape Cod, and her brother Al knew that there were no bears on Cape Cod. And he knew immediately what this thing was, as he had already had an encounter with the Black Flash. That's when they realized it was watching them.
Oh.
It was foggy out that evening, so occasionally they would kind of lose sight of it, and then when the fog cleared enough, they would see it again. So for a brief moment, the fog kind of obscured their vision. And a moment later, when it cleared enough, they were horrified to see that the creature was now rapidly crawling down the hill, moving quickly toward them. The 4 children ran inside. Their parents were not home at the time, so they would have to fend for themselves. They ran to the kitchen and armed themselves with knives, rolling pins, They were panicking, getting ready. What do we do? What do we do? When all of a sudden, a hush fell over the house. Looking at the front door, they realized they had forgotten to lock it.
Oh, come on.
And that's when they noticed the doorknob start to turn. Now, what's interesting, though, is that the phantom continued to rattle the doorknob and make weird breathing and grunting noises, but it never did actually enter the house. Which perhaps it is something just looking for the fear element.
Yeah.
Or is it something more akin to a vampire? Does it need to be invited in?
I don't know.
Their local neighbor heard what was going on. He looked out to see this creature standing on the porch at the door of this house with the kids. He could hear the kids screaming. The only thing he had handy was a pot of boiling water. I'm guessing if this was in late afternoon, I'm guessing maybe he was making some dinner.
Oh.
So he ran over with a pot of boiling water and chucked it at the creature. It hit the creature and apparently it screamed and ran off into the night. And this would actually be the last reported sighting of the Black Flash.
Oh.
The last mention of the Black Flash in the papers actually came on November 9th, 1939 in the Provincetown Advocate in an article called Chief Denies Current Rumors. Here's a brief excerpt.
Chief of Police Anthony P. Tarvers this morning absolutely denied the rumors current that the so-called Black Flash had been captured. As far as I'm concerned, the Black Flash is dead and gone, said the chief.
Well, something that all of my sources have been pointing out, and this is where it's going to get really fun, folks.
Oh, no.
This is when I was like, fuck yes, I love this episode already. Something that my sources made a point to point out was that this particular area of New England was no stranger to phantom beings.
Okay, I'm listening.
Entities which seem to straddle the line between ghosts, humans, superhumans. For example, back in the summer of 1692.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say 69, but okay.
Can you imagine that song? Back in the summer of 1692.
Woo.
Well, the residents of Cape Ann, there in Massachusetts, so another Massachusetts town, back in the summer of 1692, were besieged by spectral figures. Author Thomas Franklin Waters wrote about this event. Here's an excerpt.
In the middle of the witchcraft accusations in 1692, a new and unique outburst of satanic rage revealed itself. Gloucester was invaded by a spectral company of natives in French, coming out of the swamps or cornfields, sometimes singingly, again in a group. They approached the garrison. Usually the guns of the soldiers misfired, but when the guns were discharged, the bullets had no effect. Their speech was in an unknown tongue. They carried guns and real bullets shot from them were dug out of the trees. The alarm became so great that Major Samuel Appleton of Ipswich sent about 60 men on the 18th of July for the town's assistance under these inexplicable alarms, which they had suffered night and day for about a fortnight together.
Now, let's break down this story, because this is actually a lot more in-depth than that little blurb would tell you.
Okay.
In the summer of 1692, it's said that numerous apparitions dressed in white waistcoats and slacks kept Gloucester and the surrounding area on edge. In July of that year, a man named Ebenezer Babson and his family, who lived in the community of Queen Anne, were kept up every night by what sounded like several people running through their house. In fact, it was late one night when Ebenezer was returning home. He was shocked to see two men exit his home and disappear into the fields. Well, Ebenezer ran inside and asked his family who these strange men were that just left the house, and he was surprised to find that the family didn't know what he was talking about.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Ebenezer was not done yet. He quickly grabbed a rifle and took off into the fields looking for these men. After searching, he caught sight of the men from behind a log and saw them take off running into the swamps. He swore he could hear them talking and claimed to hear one of them say,
"The man of the house is now come, else we might have taken the house."
What?
Interesting.
Okay.
I just love the dichotomy of the black flash and now they're these white dressed entities.
Yes. White suits?
Yes. Well, now the family is afraid that there's a group of crooks staking out their house to rob it.
Yeah.
They're just thinking about good old-fashioned flesh and blood crooks.
They may look like Miami Coke dealers.
They might.
But they're good old-fashioned just friggin' dang house robbers.
That's right. So they immediately went to the nearest garrison to report what had happened. Just as they entered the military garrison, there came the thundering sound of heavy feet marching, as if a mass of people were marching around the outside of the garrison. Ebenezer, still with his rifle in hand, ran outside and happened to witness the same two men, clothed in white, running from the garrison and back to the swamp. Now the family is convinced that these men are enemy scouts, and there is a whole army about to take over their home. Perhaps they were French, he thought.
Oh, no.
Also interesting that even though it's two beings, when he's inside the garrison, it sounds like an army.
Yep.
You hear about that, remember, in like demonic stories, the sound of
yeah.
like legion, like during exorcisms, they will sometimes report the sound of like army marching.
Yeah, that has come up in a lot of our possession episodes during exorcisms, and has also come up a lot just in a lot of our hauntings, as you said. I think that was a thing in Parent Family, I believe.
Yes. The very next night, Ebenezer was out when he spotted what looked like the same two men in white who were now approaching him. One of them had a bright, shiny gun strapped to their back, which was very reminiscent of the guns carried by the French Canadians.
Whoa.
To his horror, Ebenezer watched as the men suddenly began running full speed in his direction. Thinking he was about to be attacked, Ebenezer ran as fast as he could to the nearest safe place, which happened to be the garrison again. He got inside just before the two men got to him. As he caught his breath inside, you could clearly hear the men outside pacing around the place. But when they stepped back outside, the mystery men were gone. A few nights later, Ebenezer was with his friend John Brown when he caught the sight now of three men who were dressed in white, all identical. They lifted their rifles, trying to get a good shot at one of them, but the phantom figures moved and dodged too quickly for them to get aim. Well, for the next 2 or 3 nights, this continued. That's when Ebenezer and John began to notice a strange pattern about these sightings. It was almost like these mysterious people dressed in white were intentionally trying to lure them away from their homes into the wilderness. They would appear and then run away in the direction of the swamps. Well, on July 14th of 1692, things were taken up a notch.
Oh, yeah.
Ebenezer and John were both outside of the garrison with all of the soldiers of the garrison with them, and that's when they spotted 6 of these mysterious men dressed in white off in the distance. Briefly, they discussed what they should do, keeping in mind that they were getting the feeling like this all might be a possible decoy to lead them into an ambush. Well, in the end, though, despite the possibility they were being led into a trap, they decided what the heck, and the group of men led by Ebenezer took off charging. Now, keep in mind, I think that some sources said there's about 20 men at this garrison. So now you got a pretty good group of men charging after this group of 6 strangers. Ebenezer was determined as ever, and he happened to chase down 2 of the men. Raising his rifle, he aimed it at one of the strangers who was now within close range. Finally, he had him, and click, his gun misfires.
Oh, no.
Why, of all moments, would this be the time his rifle wouldn't fire? Well, the men scattered, of course, hiding in the bushes. At least now, though, they had them cornered. Ebenezer called out to the rest of the men, saying he had some of them trapped over here. So the rest of the men came running over, just as 3 of these mysterious men darted out of the bushes, attempting to make a run for it. Keep in mind, this is just something that I just realized. Ebenezer had cornered 2 of them. They were hiding behind these bushes when all of a sudden 3 pop out and go running. So who knows, maybe I didn't read it clearly, but I just thought that was interesting that it started 2 and then all of a sudden 3 pop out. So 3 of these mysterious men pop out and start running. Well, Ebenezer wasn't about to let them slip away again. He raised his rifle, took aim, bang. This time the rifle worked. The shot of his rifle rang out, and all 3 of the men simultaneously fell straight to the ground as if they had all been shot. Ebenezer let out a cry of triumph. Finally, he'd gotten these hooligans.
Oh, yeah.
Ebenezer approached the area of the grass where the men lay on the ground. Right as he got to them, all 3 simultaneously sprang to their feet as if nothing had happened and ran away. As they ran, one turned with their rifle and shot back at Ebenezer. Ebenezer was lucky. The bullet missed him, but passed so close he could apparently feel the movement of air as it brushed right by him, right by his body, and struck a tree. The phantom strangers had once again escaped. Now, here is something interesting to point out. Obviously, there's the fact that Ebenezer's gun happened to misfire at just the right moment. Then there's the fact that they all fell together as if all 3 of them had been shot, only to all of a sudden rise again and run away. But here's another strange thing to consider. There were a few times when these strangers actually shot back at the residents of Cape Ann. But whenever they did, their bullets would always narrowly miss their target. And they know these strangers were using real bullets because after each encounter, they were able to dig them out of trees or wherever they had hit, the ground or whatnot. So it's almost like these bullets were intentionally missing their targets. In a weird way, it almost seems like these entities were playing. Much like the Black Flash, as scary as the encounters were, almost no one actually got hurt, with the exception of the guy whose hand got crushed.
Yeah, yikes.
So why is that? Maybe it has to do with the fear thing. Maybe they work you up and scare, you know what I mean? Just to get that, you know what I mean?
That's really the only thing I can think of.
Well, Ebenezer and the men regrouped, reloading their rifles. Together, they once again charged upon the spot they thought the men were hiding, and when they did, again, a group of these mysterious men scattered in all directions. Ebenezer once again cornered one of these mysterious men and shot him from not that long of a distance. The man fell to the ground amongst the brush. But when Ebenezer went to find where his body lay, there was no sign of him. There wasn't even a drop of blood. It didn't even look like the brush had been like if someone had been laying in it.
Right.
Once again, the men had come up empty. In the distance, somewhere in the swamp, they could hear the voices of the men talking loudly, but in a language they didn't recognize. It didn't even sound like French to them.
Right.
In the coming days, men from the garrison were assigned to patrol the area and keep a lookout for these strange men. One day, 2 of these scouts that were on patrol witnessed several of these strange white-clad men coming out of an orchard where it appeared they were conducting a ritual of some kind. They counted 11 of them in total. One of the scouts that day was a man named Richard Dolliver. He raised his rifle and fired into the thick of these men, and as they usually did, they all just scattered in different directions but showed no signs of injury. Well, now the folks of Cape Ann were terrified that they had something worse on their hands than just French troublemakers.
Oh, yeah.
Perhaps these mysterious men were devils. This sparked a frenzy in the townspeople, and in response, Captain Appleton of nearby Ipswich came to the aid of Cape Ann, bringing with him 60 armed men. For the next 2 weeks, this group of men that now numbered, if you consider probably the men from the garrison, it was 20, we're talking about a group of over 80 men. They were led on a goose chase day and night. These mysterious men in white would appear and disappear in the blink of an eye. Some were shot at point blank but ran away with no sign of injury. They could also move through the swamp with great ease, leaving behind no tracks of any kind. One day, Ebenezer saw 3 of these mysterious men coming up the road, so he hid in a bush and waited until they were literally 3 feet away.
Oh my God.
And bang! Ebenezer fired his rifle at one of them from the bush. The mysterious men did little more than just give him a dirty look and keep walking by. Well, the militia that had assembled decided this was enough. From what they could tell, these mysterious men were never actually trying to hurt anybody. They were just sort of being pranksters.
Yeah.
So the militia disbanded. And strangely enough, once the militia had disbanded, the mysterious men in white were never seen again.
Very strange.
So what were these things?
Yeah. Huh.
Here's an excerpt from a book written by Charles M. Skinner titled Myths and Legends of Our Own Land, Volume 1. Here he explains how the whole ordeal ended.
One night, a dark and hostile throng emerged from the wood and moved toward the blockhouse, where 20 musketeers were keeping guard. "If you be ghosts or devils, I will foil you," cried the captain, and tearing a silver button from his doublet, he rammed it into his gun and fired on the advancing host. Even as the smoke of his musket was blown on the wind, so did the beleaguering army vanish, the silver bullet proving that they were not of humankind. The night was wearing on when a cry went out that the devils were coming again. Arms were laid aside this time, and the watchers sank to their knees in prayer. Directly after the name of God was uttered, the marching ceased, and heaven rang with the howls of the angry fiends. Never again were Leaguers seen in Gloucester.
That's right, they were referred to as the Spectre Leaguers. One of my sources was called the Spectre Leaguers, July 1692 at historic Ipswich. Well, what that website has, which I thought was interesting, it was just an excerpt from a book that was written in this same era by none other than Cotton Mather, one of, I believe he was one of the judges, right, that presided over the Salem witch trials?
Yes.
But this guy was also part of this whole phantom white soldiers popping up in Cape Ann.
Very interesting. I mean, a lot of very strange activity happening around this time.
Yes.
Wow.
So how interesting is that, huh?
Yeah. Interesting.
Well, let's jump ahead to Connecticut, 1881.
I would love to, yeah.
A different state now, but New England, all those states, they're all right together.
Oh, yeah.
The fall of that year saw the arrival of another infamous phantom, the New Hallville Ghost.
Oh.
It got its name from the area that it terrorized. The New Hallville area of Connecticut is located between the towns of New Haven and Hamden, Connecticut. Much like the Black Flash, the New Hallville Ghost was said to stand between 8 to 12 feet tall with the ability to leap over tall fences. He was seen almost nightly in the area around Shelton Avenue and Division Street. One encounter happened to a young woman named Jenny Burton and her friend as they were on their way home one day in New Haven. They got off the horse trolley and were making their way down Division Street when the infamous ghost leapt out in front of them. Jenny passed out cold, and her friend just screamed as the entity quickly ran off. Keep in mind, while the thing was named the New Hallville Ghost, no one actually thought this thing was a ghost in the traditional sense. For example, why jump over a fence when you can just walk through it? That being said, they also didn't think this thing was fully human. Armed mobs even regularly searched the area, but the New Hallville Ghost was never found. 7 years later, in Milford, Connecticut, a young woman was walking home when she felt a tug at her clothing. She turned around to see a figure much like what had been seen in New Hallville 7 years earlier. She screamed and the thing tore at her skirt and top before running off. An armed militia searched for the suspect, but they were never found. In February of 1925, so jumping forward again, and June of 1928, the town of Bridgeport, Connecticut, was besieged by an entity known as the Phantom Stabber. This entity was unnaturally tall and fast, but what was wild about this one was that it mostly struck in broad daylight in crowded areas. When he would attack, he would rapidly stab his victim with a sharp blade, but rarely were any of the wounds actually serious. One young woman who was a victim of the Phantom Stabber was stabbed inside a variety store in front of over 100 people, yet somehow the Phantom was never caught.
What?
And finally, from November of 1930 to February of 1931, Boston was plagued by a phantom that witnesses claimed wielded a silent weapon. It was like a gun, but made no noise. None of the victims were fatally hurt, but each of the victims were hit with a small caliber bullet that were actually removed from their wounds later by a doctor. So it wasn't like there was actual evidence of that they were attacked.
Wow.
And of course, the Phantom was never caught, and none of the victims that he shot died or even really had that serious of wounds.
Right.
So, Maureen, what are these things?
I don't know. This is like, I wonder if they're all kind of related to each other. I mean, are they all literally the same thing?
Well, it's like, is this a different genre of the unexplained, a different category?
Yeah.
These phantoms, because they don't seem to operate like traditional ghosts. They don't
Right.
operate like traditional, what we think of as like extraterrestrials, or at least they don't have the same motives. So what are these things? Because in many ways, people have called like the Spring-Heeled Jack and stuff, are they like early examples of like what we would call almost, even though they're doing villainous things, they're almost like superhumans, like a superhero, like
Right.
human or at least humanoid people with super abilities. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. You guys let us know what you think is going on. If you have any theories or anything to add or anything like that, feel free to reach out to us on any of our socials, or you can email us at creepstreetpodcast@gmail.com. And Dylan, thank you so much for doing all of that wonderful research today.
Of course, it was my pleasure, but I'll tell you something, Maureen.
Okay.
Well, I got a list of names I wouldn't mind jumping fences with.
Uh-oh.
Folks, give it on up for our top-tier Patreon subscribers. Of course, the Dream James Watkins, the Finnish Face Via Lungfist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Vivacious Vicky McHugh, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid, Chris Hackworth, the oh-so-suave Sean Richardson, the British Bonebreaker Bex Martin, the notorious Nicholas Barker, the terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand, Noeline Vivilli, the loathsome Johnny Love, the carnivorous Kevin Bogey, the killer stud Carl Staub, the fire starter Heather Carter, the conqueror Christopher Damian Damaris, the awfully awesome Annie, the murderous Maggie Leach, the serve sexy Sam Hackworth, the evil Elizabeth Riley, Lauren Hellfire, Hernandez Lopez, the maniacal Laura Maynard, the vicious Karen Van Buren, the arch nemesis Aaron Bird, the sadistic Sergio Castillo, the rapscallion Ryan Crum, the beast Benjamin Huang, the devilish Chris Doucette, the psycho Sam, the electric Emily Jeong, the ghoulish Gert Hankum, the renegade Corey Ramos, the crazed Carlos, the antagonist Andrew Park, the monstrous Michaela Schur, the witchy wonder J.P. Weimer, and the freaky Ben Forsyth.
Whoa. Dylan, great work listing off those righteous names. Thank you so much to our top tier Patreon subscribers. We're so grateful for you. Thank you to all of our Patreon subscribers, and thank you to all of you for joining us here today. If you want to get that extra bonus content, feel free to check on out patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast. Also, please remember to like, rate, subscribe, leave a review, anything like that. We really do appreciate it.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
Good night and goodbye.